Our next speaker will be Michelle McVicker, and she is the Collections and Education Assistant at the Museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology. She previously worked as a Collections Management Assistant at the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was also a Smithsonian Cultural Heritage Fellow at the National Museum of American History, the Lenore G. Tawney Foundation Fellow at the Fabric Workshop and Museum, and a Collections Management Intern at the Chicago History Museum. She received her Fashion Studies MA at Parsons School of Design. So please help me to welcome Michelle.
Okay. First, I'd like to say I'm really humbled to be a part of the Colloquium, and I am very encouraged by their turnout and by everyone else's research presentations. All right. Appearances Can Be Deceiving, The Dresses of Frida Kahlo, is the first exhibition to present such a wide variety of Frida Kahlo's personal archive, as most of the objects had been hidden for over 50 years after Kahlo's death in 1947. Curated by Circe and Estrosa, with exhibition designed by Judith Clark, it has been on display in the Frida Kahlo Museum in Coyoacan, Mexico, since November 2012. I use the exhibition Appearances Can Be Deceiving as a case study, exploring Frida Kahlo as a transnational subject whose dress became considered fashionable despite not being modern. My aim is to shed light on the complex causes and implications of contemporary fashion museology, going beyond the canon by studying topics outside the hegemonic Western tradition. I believe this exhibit serves as an example of the potentiality of visibly worn dress, as Kahlo's clothing have achieved posthumous resignifications and are culturally valued for their traces of use. An exhibition catalog for appearances was never made, therefore I aim to fill a gap in the research. I argue that the insistence on perpetuating displays of perfection creates an undeniable dissonance between museum goers' present-day viewing experience and the once lived experience of garments. I claim the transparency with which Kahlo's dress is presented within the personal archive of her household, and now museum, creates a sense of legitimacy and authenticates her self-portrayal through clothing. Although curatorial techniques towards exhibiting dress vary depending on the type of museum, so for example, an art institution versus an ethnographic museum, display approaches are usually driven by presenting an object in its most original state. I argue that as a result, we as spectators have become accustomed to viewing perfection, making it our subconscious aesthetic of choice. A reliance on sight and the prohibited physical interaction with an object leaves museum goers to resort to their own remembered bodily experiences in order to relate to the clothing displayed before them. While people are encouraged to theoretically imagine the feel and materiality of clothing, handling of any sort inevitably causes harm to an object's condition. Despite the garment's former use of existing on a living body, our touch today will tangibly taint the object. The constant reiteration that objects must be protected from our bodily interactions further concretizes an erasure of the former life the garment inhibited. Through a deliberate manipulation of the past, which includes the erasure of human use, fashion objects in museums are able to live outside the realm of their initial reality. This schism in representation further emphasizes the need to analyze fashion museology's long-standing apprehension towards visibly worn garments. In April of 2004, over 300 of Frida Kahlo's personal objects, including clothing, jewelry, and orthopedic devices, were discovered inside of a bathroom in La Casa Azul. The Frida Kahlo Museum hired a team of experts to research the origins of her objects and possible explanations of their presence and use. The result was the 2007 publication of Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, The Fashion of Frida Kahlo, whose ethnographic details offer insight into the cultural significations of Frida Kahlo's clothing. Given that Self-Portrait was published 5 years before the creation of the exhibition, Appearances, it serves as a preliminary overview of the materiality of Kahlo's dress, thoroughly illustrating condition and cultural origins. As part of my research, I also conducted in-person interviews with cultural anthropologist Martha Turek and Hilda Trujillo, the director of the Frida Kahlo Museum, who both witnessed the unveiling of Frida's belongings. An added layer to the examined authenticity projected throughout the exhibit Appearances is the remarkable condition Kahlo's visibly worn clothing was found in. In Self-Portrait, conservators Denise and Magdalena Rosenwig describe, quote, "The small wardrobe, a simple piece painted white and weathered by time, held the most precious treasures. Astonishingly, the garments were in relatively good condition, protected by this modest piece of furniture from both light and dust." Not only did this wardrobe physically house Kahlo's clothing, it also protected her belongings from the elements, maintaining them in impeccable shape. Quote, "Everything was perfectly folded and miraculously well preserved. Perhaps some curious alchemy of cosmetic powders, pharmaceutical chemicals, and humidity, despite creating a strange smell, somehow protected this magnificent legacy." So on this slide, on the left is a photograph by Paolo Aquinaco that is featured in the book, and on the right is my photograph. So as part of my research, I visited the Frida Kahlo Museum on 2 separate occasions over the span of 2.5 days in February of 2007, and I was extremely lucky to witness a rotation of the garments, so I actually got to see an entirely new set of clothing on display. During my first visit to La Casa Azul on the 27th, I saw the modest wardrobe in her bedroom with no mention of its vital role in preserving her clothing. The whole point of clothing within the fashion exhibition context is to exist out of time, presenting impermanence. When a used object is being presented as pristine, it produces an erasure of the historicity of an object. I argue that the perpetuation of displaying pristine objects, or the appearance of, is denying death. In the final chapter of Self-Portrait, conservators Denise and Magdalena Rosenwig elaborate on the restoration process. They describe how the aim of their conservation was to stop or slow the garment's deterioration while respecting the traces of Frida Kahlo's use, and make them uniquely hers, paint stains, cigarette burns, mending done by Kahlo herself or at her bidding. On the scan page on the left on this slide, the deterioration and procedures for a Guatemalan huipil and a Tijuana skirt are explained and documented in detail. On the right, a photograph by Pablo Aquinaco depicts the beauty in the materials used to conserve, and the picture on the right is across 2 pages of the book. In the same chapter, the conservators note how the degree of deterioration was minimal for items kept in the small wardrobe, shielded from the light, but the clothes that were hanging on a rack on the wall had evidence of damage consisting of rips, gaps, unstitched areas, stains caused by dampness, paint, and medicine, as well as fading. The conservation process for this white Tijuana huipil is also described in Self-Portrait, and its imperfect condition was happily apparent when I saw it on display. So my image is on the right, and I didn't see it the first time I went, so I was very excited when I came back and it was up. In Finding Frida Kahlo, Barbara Levine states, "The material of our personal archive stands as a proxy of the expressions of our ideas, relationships, and memories. To destroy or hide these physical traces can be symbolic of destroying or suppressing the ideas, memories, and relationships themselves. This intentional focus on keeping the garment's traces of use intact supports my notions that appearances can be deceiving is a fashion exhibit blatantly displaying visibly worn dress. The fact that there is a section dedicated to conservation with detailed photographs shows how not just the exhibit, but the book documenting the process as well, aims to dispel the myth of perfection within the realm of the fashion exhibition." In February 2011, almost 2 years before the opening of Appearances Can Be Deceiving, the Frida Kahlo Museum commissioned Japanese photographer Ishu Miyake to also photograph Frida Kahlo's belongings, which Ellen had mentioned earlier. Curators Circe and Estrosa explained the idea for the book Frida by Ishishu came from realizing the spatial constraints of the exhibition space in La Casa Azul would only allow for a small fraction of Kahlo's 300 found garments to be displayed. And Estrosa wanted to give audiences the chance to access all of Kahlo's items and experience the same intimate encounter and dialogue that the museum's research team and herself had established within the exhibit. In this photography catalog, the imperfections of Frida Kahlo's clothing, her traces of use, become the focal point. Kahlo's multicultural interventions with her dress are also highlighted. Ishishu portrays a deeper woman who modified her clothing and jewelry, who designed her own wardrobe, who matched Spanish fabrics with French silks and Mexican designs, who decorated her shoes and decorated herself. And so here I just have an example from that book. There is a bodice where you can see some hand stitching. It's difficult to know if it was Frida or one of her seamstresses that did the actual stitching. And then on the right there is some evidence of darning on a stocking, which is also apparent in the Unraveled exhibition. In Consumption, Duration, and History, anthropologist Arjun Appadurai applies the term patina to fashion, further denoting that clothing as an aged object is valued for its survival in various structural timeframes. In regards to the appeal of material memory, Appadurai explains, whenever aristocratic lifestyles are threatened, patina acquires a double meaning, indexing both the special status of its owner and the owner's special relationship to a way of life that is no longer available. The latter is what makes patina a truly scarce resource, for it always indicates the fact that a way of living is now gone forever. In regards to this excerpt, Frida Kahlo, the artist, may be gone, but her belongings, especially her clothing, now take place of her body. The used condition of Kahlo's garments are held up to high regard because they show visible traces of a way of life that is no longer available. In Ishushi's photographs, Kahlo's clothing is presented unmounted, disembodied, wrinkled, simply sprawled on a surface. There are close-ups on stains, mends, tears, snags, and evident fading from sunstreaks, all showing the beauty and the decay. The degradation exposes the actual materiality of the garment, the warp and weft of the fabric. As Hilda Trujillo, director of the Frida Kahlo Museum, stated in the introduction, through details captured on bodies, on pieces of clothing and personal objects, the photographer portrays the marks, the testimonies left on them by sickness, joy, suffering, anguish, tenderness, happiness, disenchantment, bitterness, fear, hate, solitude, pleasure. I contextualize the discourse of this case study within the broader context of both fashion museology history and the philosophical questioning of the disembodied dress. And Feldman's theory on contact points was also really formidable in my research. Circe and Estrosa and Judith Clark, co-curators of Appearances Can Be Deceiving, the dresses of Frida Kahlo, counteract the eeriness of uninhabited fashion, bringing Kahlo's garments back to life by exhibiting them within the context of La Casa Azul, the house where Kahlo was born and where she died. Before I visited the Frida Kahlo Museum in Coyoacan, Mexico, my research had led me to believe that Appearances was held within La Casa Azul, Kahlo's family home and her place of residence during her marriages to Diego Rivera. But once I arrived, I was surprised to find that the exhibit was actually housed in a white building adjacent to the Blue House. During my interview with the director of the Frida Kahlo Museum, Hilda Trujillo explained how in the 2000s the museum realized they needed more exhibition space and decided to purchase the neighboring home. The building also houses the conservation lab and museum offices. But as you can see, there's a very clear difference between the atmosphere that La Casa Azul produces. You can see it in the photograph that I took on the left versus the white building in which the actual exhibit is housed in. And there are very few, if you were to type in today, La Casa Azul, you're not going to see this image. The only way I was able to even obtain an image of the building because again, the beauty of research is in retrospect, you wish you had taken that photograph, is a screenshot from a virtual tour of the museum. So that's where the image of the white building is coming from. In her work on personal archives, Susan Schwarzenberg says, while human memory is fraught with inaccuracy, distortion, and subjectivity, the physical remnants of a personal archive, including the space of a home itself, serve to undisputedly reinforce history. The fact that the exhibition appearances can be deceiving is said to be held within Kahlo's home, immediately imbues it with meaning and authenticity. Through historiography and the selective representations of particular pasts, we can decipher where our fashion museological spectrum towards authenticity is grounded. So in my research, I came across the multifaceted origins of Kahlo's garments, ranging from the traditional isthmus dress that she is most revered for, to wearing textiles from Spain and China, to garments she designed herself. Through her blatant display of Mexicanidad, or Mexicanness, Frida Kahlo became a fashion icon, thus making her clothing worthy of museum display. In the exhibition review, Uninhabited Dresses, Frida Kahlo from Icon of Mexico to Fashion Muse, Alba Aragon states, Kahlo turned to the clothing of her nation's most traditionally downtrodden groups, as an individual wanting the distinction of garments that were not mass-produced. I'd like to point out that in this manner, it is evident Kahlo's garments materially illustrate that she was not dressing in a traditional Tijuana style in order to feel as though she belonged to the community. She was in fact dressing in this manner to differentiate herself. Yet the material signifiers expressed through the representation of Tijuana dress did dually associate her with the community. As Susan Vidal says, the embroideries on these pieces tell stories of family and ancestral identity, thereby assimilating the wearer into the group. When an inventory of the garments found in Kahlo's bathroom was developed, the research team curiously discovered none of her separate garments created a complete Tijuana ensemble. In clothing alone, 32 blouses, 23 huipiles, which are the boxed blouses that you see in both of these images, and 38 skirts were discovered. One way in which Frida Kahlo commodified her dress was through the unconventional uses of specific pieces. She never wore pieces according to occasion, as commonly used in Tehuantepec tradition, choosing instead to mix and match tops and skirts as she pleased. In Self-Portrait, cultural anthropologist Martha Turek states, although huipiles and skirts from the Zapotec region in the isthmus of Tehuantepec are dominant in her private attire as well as in her pictorial work, most of the photographs show what her wardrobe confirms: Indian and ethnic garments from Mexico, Guatemala, and China. In addition, Frida owned a good number of garments from Europe and United States, as well as handmade blouses and skirts sewn to her garments sewn to her own taste by seamstresses. Very few garments have a manufacturer's label. In regards to pieces Kahlo designed herself, on the left is a photograph from Self-Portrait of an ensemble made of red cotton fabric manufactured on petal looms and with blue stripes spaced 2 inches apart. Turek describes how the material was traditionally used for the old-style wraparound worn by elderly women. Seamstresses transformed the fabric into an outfit for Frida, in which the stripes are vertical on the huipil and horizontal on the skirt. On the right is an isthmus-style silk blouse with ribbons of the same material designed by Frida. Despite Kahlo's constant mixing of non-Tijuana attire, to the extent of even creating her own similar garments, during my interview with Turek, she did express a belief that Kahlo cared about the authenticity of her clothing. Having developed a relationship with one of Frida's seamstresses during the inventory process, Turek asserts the sheer number of things that are authentic is much greater than the things made by the seamstresses. On June 16th, Frida Kahlo, Making Herself Up, opened at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Co-curated by Circe Nostrosa and Claire Wilcox, it is the first time Kahlo's belongings have ever been displayed outside of Mexico. I acknowledge that a catalog has been produced, and I would like to bring a photograph featured to your attention. And I think that this example beautifully illustrates the looking closely that was just mentioned in the Q&A. In November of 2017, a new team of conservators, mount makers, and curators visited the Blue House. They detected many traces of pigment on the skirts upon which Kahlo rested her palette and brushes. Quote, "Perhaps one of the most moving discoveries is the realization that a dash of green paint on one of Kahlo's pre-Columbian necklaces, consisting of jade beads unearthed from archaeological excavations which the artist had strung herself, and which are similar to those featured in her 1933 self-portrait with a necklace, is in fact a deliberately applied brushstroke of green paint. It is tempting to speculate that Kahlo was trying to match the color of the stones while painting herself." I believe this excerpt further illustrates the richness of Kahlo's objects and how they lend themselves to multiple theoretical approaches. So in conclusion, an aspect of what makes historical garments so fascinating is their ability to survive the wearer, but a reluctance towards openly addressing and acknowledging garments' imperfect state perpetuates an attention to visibility rather than tactility. Any direct physical contact between the materiality of a garment and the physical body of human beings has and continues to be greatly discouraged within fashion museology. Yet I argue when we eliminate the traces of use of a body in a garment, we are also taking the performative functions and potentiality of fashion. Appearances can be deceiving. The dresses of Frida Kahlo attempts to stray away from the notion of beauty only existing in perfection. By displaying objects Frida intervened, whether through painting, sewing, or designing them, the exhibition encourages audiences to recognize the value seen in objects with visible traces of use. Thank you.